Picture this: a chamber carved deep beneath the Egyptian desert. No sunlight has touched these walls for centuries. The only light comes from dozens of torches, their flames trembling, casting monstrous shadows across stone carved with the symbols of eternity. The air is thick, heavy, suffocating, smelling of honey and smoke. You are a soldier, summoned at midnight. Your orders were simple, yet strange. Bring honey, 10 jars of it, and speak of this to no one. Now, you watch as servants open the jars, thick, golden liquid glistening in the firelight. A boy stands on a cold stone platform, stripped bare, his body trembling. Without a word, the servants begin brushing honey across his skin layer after layer, until every inch of him gleams like molten gold. The boy has been trained not to scream, not to beg, not to move, but his eyes betray him. His eyes are screaming. Then the sound, a low, rising hum, the buzzing of wings. Around the chamber are clay containers sealed, trembling violently as what's inside thrashes against the walls. The servants glance nervously toward the throne at the far end of the chamber, and there he sits, the Pharaoh. 96 years old, his skin withered, his eyes still sharp, a god in mortal flesh. His name is Pepi II, and he has ruled Egypt longer than any man in history. With the smallest gesture of his hand, the first container is opened. Scarab beetles starved for 5 days spill onto the floor, swarming up the honey-covered boy. Their mandibles are sharp, their instincts ravenous. The boy twitches as the first bites pierce his skin. Next, the fire ants collected from the Nubian valleys, bred for venom, dripping fury. They march in rivers across his chest, his face, his legs, every bite a burning needle of agony. Finally, the wasps. They explode from their clay prison like winged demons, circling, stinging, swelling his flesh into a grotesque mask of suffering. The chamber fills with his muffled cries. The walls are carved for acoustics, designed to hold the sound, to echo it, to transform his pain into a kind of music. And the Pharaoh watches, not with horror, not with pity, but with fascination. He leans forward, directing like an artist perfecting a performance. "More honey on the feet," he commands. Another wave of ants. Let the beetles concentrate on the soft areas. This is not punishment. This is not ritual sacrifice. This is entertainment. The boy will not die, not yet. He is too valuable. He will be kept alive, healed just enough to repeat the ritual again and again. He is one of tens of thousands who will vanish into Pepi's chambers across a reign that lasted 94 years. This is not a conspiracy. This is not a campfire horror story. This is history erased from official Egyptian records, whispered by priests, documented by foreign observers, and rediscovered in mass graves that still terrify archaeologists today. But before I tell you how a 6-year-old child became history's most perverted predator, before I explain how an entire civilization bent itself to feed one man's appetites, you need to understand something chilling. Pepi II was not born a monster, he was made. The year is 2278 BEE-CEE. The throne of Egypt stands empty. Pharaoh Pepi I is dead, but not by chance. The official record claims a scorpion sting. But how does a scorpion pass 14 guards, through 4 locked doors, past 2 food tasters, to deliver a fatal wound identical to a dagger cut? His eldest son dies the same week, supposedly of river fever, while stationed deep in the desert, miles from any river. Convenient. Which left the crown on the head of a child no one expected to rule. Pharaoh Pepi II. He is 6 years old, quiet, obsessed with wooden toy soldiers, known more for following his mother around the women's quarters than commanding anyone. Yet, within 7 days, this boy would be bathed in blood, crowned as a living god, and broken into something unrecognizable. The coronation of an Egyptian pharaoh was not a ceremony, it was a transformation. It was designed to turn flesh into divinity. But what happens when you force a ritual of divine transformation on a 6-year-old boy who cannot yet separate symbol from reality? At dawn, the priests strip the child naked before 3,000 nobles. A white bull, sacred pure, is led into the hall. Its throat is slit, its blood gushing into a golden basin. Before the eyes of the court, Pepi is lifted and plunged into the steaming basin, held under until his tiny lungs burn, until his body thrashes, until he is seconds from drowning. When he emerges, gasping, covered in crimson, the priests expect tears, terror, a desperate cry for his mother. Instead, little Pepi laughs, not nervous laughter, not hysteria, but the delighted giggle of a child who has just discovered a new game. He looks at his hands dripping with blood, licks his fingers, and asks the priests if he can go under again. The high priest later confessed in his private journal, "In 40 years of ceremony, nothing terrified him more than that child's smile." But the ritual was far from over. A prisoner is dragged forward, forced to kneel before the boy god. Pepi is handed a ceremonial bronze blade, far too heavy for him. His instructions: prove your divinity by removing the man's head. The first strike misses, sending the child sprawling. The second opens a shoulder. The third shatters teeth. The fourth tears open a throat. It takes 11 blows before the head finally rolls free. Pepi does not stop until the body is unrecognizable. He picks up the head, peers into its lifeless eyes, and whispers something. When asked what he had said, the child responds, "I asked it what death tastes like. It did not answer, but I think I know. Death tastes like power." A 6-year-old child, naked, bathed in blood, holding a severed head, philosophizing about the flavor of mortality. This was not trauma breaking him, this was revelation, and it was only the beginning. The coronation should have been symbolic. For a normal child, it might have been terrifying enough to scar, or perhaps forgotten, as priests and caretakers softened the trauma. But Pepi II was not normal. He didn't cry, he didn't flinch, he didn't seek comfort. Instead, he studied. From that day forward, death was no longer an ending in his mind, it was a process. Something to be analyzed, repeated, perfected. Within weeks, he would have his first opportunity to continue the experiment. Tradition demanded that all of Pepi I's secondary wives, 23 women, accompany their king into the afterlife. Normally, they were offered poisoned wine, quick, ceremonial, clean. But the new child god made an unusual request: "I want to watch them leave." The priests hesitated, the nobles shifted nervously, but who among them could deny a god? The women were strangled with silk cords. Slowly, deliberately, the executioners tightened, then loosened, then tightened again, forcing their victims to sway between suffocation and breath, between agony and fleeting relief. And through it all, the boy king sat on a throne so large his feet dangled above the floor, eyes wide, studying every twitch, every gasp, every flicker of terror across 23 dying faces. He was not horrified, he was fascinated. When it ended, he clapped his small hands. But Pepi's education in suffering didn't stop with his father's wives. 41 half-siblings, the other children of Pepi I, were brought before the throne. The boys were strangled swiftly, but for the girls, Pepi invented something new. They had to choose: serve him in silence for the rest of their lives, or join their mothers in death. 6 chose survival, the others were executed. Those 6 were kept in a special wing of the palace, visited at random hours by the child king. He didn't always touch them. Sometimes he simply sat in silence, staring, observing the way fear reshaped their breathing, their posture, their eyes. One survivor, decades later, would describe him this way: he wanted to see the moment when fear grew so great that the mind shut itself off. He called it the divine silence, and when he saw it, he smiled. At 8 years old, Pepi discovered that certain poisons did not kill, at least not quickly. Some paralyzed the body while leaving the victim conscious. This revelation consumed him. He demanded mixtures. He forced his tutors to help record results. By 9, he had created what he called the Great Work Scrolls, categorizing every form of human pain. He was not content with suffering. He wanted to know the flavors of suffering. Burning pain versus cutting pain. Poison versus crushing. Insects versus strangulation. He treated agony like a scholar treats language. He catalogued, compared, refined. To him, pain was not a side effect. Pain was data. When he was 10, the entire Egyptian court gathered for routine matters, famine reports, trade negotiations, military updates. In the middle of the hall, a cat caught a bird. The wing snapped. The bird fluttered helplessly while the cat toyed with it. Everyone expected the scene to be ignored. The affairs of empire waited. But Pepi ordered silence. For 1 hour, the most powerful nation on earth stood still while a child god watched a cat torture a bird. He leaned forward, eyes glowing, following every moment. When a courtier dared to suggest continuing state business, Pepi had him beaten unconscious. When the bird finally died, Pepi stroked the cat, fed it from his plate, and declared it sacred. "Any creature that kills slowly," he said, "is holy." That day, the boy king announced his revelation. Death was not a moment, death was a process. And that process was the most important thing in existence. At 11, Pepi wrote a letter to his general returning from Nubia. The general had secured a gift, a pygmy dancer. Most translations of this letter present it as childish excitement. Pepi demanded the dwarf be guarded carefully, checked 10 times a night, protected at all costs. But the omitted section, the one scribes tried to erase, reveals something darker. Pepi requested another child of the same weight as the pygmy. He wanted to conduct comparisons. How long could each survive without water? Did smaller bodies respond differently to poison? Did their screams sound different? The general was warned, if either child arrived dead, the punishment would be catastrophic. Sailors' families would be fed to crocodiles. Officers would be impaled. This was not a boy excited for entertainment. This was a boy planning an experiment. By 16, Pepi was no longer satisfied with watching. He needed to participate. Palace workers were ordered to present their sons for blessing by the god king. These blessings were held in private chambers. Children entered healthy, many left broken, some never left at all. The first recorded scandal came when the son of a noble was returned after 3 days, with injuries so severe the embalmer refused to prepare him for burial. The family demanded justice. Pepi's solution was brilliant and horrifying. He declared the boy had undergone sacred transformation. His suffering had opened doorways to divine wisdom. The family, still enraged, was invited to the palace for compensation. They were never seen again. Realizing he needed a more systematic way to supply his appetites, Pepi created a new position, the overseer of royal entertainments. Officially ceremonial, in reality this was an entire department dedicated to finding, transporting, and preparing children for Pepi's use. Within months, a network of scouts, guards, and physicians stretched across Egypt. Boys were measured for height, weight, even the pitch of their voices. Pepi preferred high-pitched screams, easier for his aging ears to hear. For decades, this system would grow, until the empire itself bent around the logistics of one man's obsessions. But for now, Pepi was still young. His reign of terror had only begun. By the time Pepi turned 50, he had long abandoned the innocent mask of childhood. For nearly 5 decades, he had experimented in private chambers, poisons, paralysis, strangulation, cutting. But as with any addict, tolerance built over time. Ordinary cruelty no longer thrilled him. And then he witnessed an accident. In one of the royal warehouses, a worker dropped a jar of honey. The sticky gold spread across the floor. and within minutes insects swarmed. Ants, flies, even scarabs, consuming the sweetness, crawling over the worker's skin as he tried to clean the mess. Pepi watched. The man screamed as ants bit into his flesh, as beetles crawled into his robes. And in that moment, the old pharaoh experienced what witnesses later described as a religious revelation. Nature itself could provide the instruments of torment, not daggers, not fire, not whips, but the creatures Egypt had worshipped for centuries. If he could harness them, his cruelty could be disguised as ritual. This was the birth of the honey chambers. The first experiments were simple: a boy stripped and covered in honey, a jar of insects released. The results were dramatic but unpredictable. Some insects licked the honey without biting. Some children fainted too quickly. Pepi demanded refinement. Through systematic trial and error, hundreds of boys sacrificed in tests. Palace torturers perfected the formula. Honey mixed with saliva created scents irresistible to beetles. Tears added salt that drove certain ants into frenzy. Fear pheromones, released from terrified victims, made wasps attack with unprecedented aggression. Even the timing was optimized. Sunset was chosen when some insects were most active. Lotus wine was administered not to numb pain, but to prevent fainting. Consciousness was essential. By his 52nd year on the throne, Pepi had transformed a crude spectacle into a precise ritual. One chamber was not enough. Pepi wanted variety, progression, orchestration. The honey rituals became an entire underground complex, 9 rooms, connected by corridors, each serving a unique purpose. The preparation chamber, where boys were washed, oiled, inspected for wounds. The honey room, the main stage, where insects were released. The beetle pit. Thousands of scarabs starved on raw meat until they associated flesh with food. The serpent hall. For victims who had survived insects too many times, venomous snakes introduced new flavors of pain. The fire chamber. Controlled burns, calculated for maximum spectacle. The recovery chamber, staffed by physicians whose sole job was to keep boys alive long enough for repeated use. The disposal room, its purpose self-evident. The observation platform, where Pepi sat, directing it all like a maestro. Every scream was amplified by acoustics carved into the walls. The chambers themselves were instruments designed to turn suffering into symphony. Sessions were not chaotic. They followed strict choreography. A boy was restrained on a stone platform. Palm frond brushes painted honey across every inch of his body. Servants paid special attention to the soles of the feet, the lips, the groin places Pepi knew would provoke the most violent reactions. The insects were released in calculated waves. Beetles first, tearing flesh with mandibles designed for hide. Ants second, rivers of venom burning like fire. Wasps last, swelling the face into an unrecognizable mask of agony. Pepi directed each adjustment. More honey on the legs. Release another jar of ants, but only on the left side. Remove the wasps, but let the beetles work longer. It was performance art, and the pharaoh was the director. Sessions lasted hours. They were paused when death threatened, restarted when victims recovered. Boys who survived were sent to recovery, only to be returned again days later. This was not execution, it was repetition. Each child was a reusable instrument of suffering. Over time, the rituals scaled. Pepi's personal obsession warped into a state function. Entire agricultural regions shifted to bee farming. Egypt produced more honey during Pepi's last 2 decades than in the previous century combined. Fields that should have grown grain now bloomed with flowers to feed bees while the population starved. The overseer of entertainments expanded into a sprawling bureaucracy. 4 regional directors, 10 coordinators each, hundreds of scouts, guards, transporters, and physicians. Scouts traveled village to village, measuring boys against strict criteria. Height within 2 fingers, weight within half a debon, skin tone matched to pottery shards, even scream pitch was evaluated. Boat builders crafted hidden compartments for child transport, metalworkers forged restraints, potters specialized in insect containers. Egypt itself had become an engine designed to procure and process children for one man's pleasure. Not all submitted quietly. In villages, desperate fathers began to fight back. They called themselves the Fathers of the Lost. With stolen weapons, they ambushed convoys, freed boys, killed scouts. For 6 months, they struck fear into the procurement network. Pepi's response was apocalyptic. Every male in suspected families, from newborns to grandfathers, was taken to the honey chambers. But these victims were not killed quickly. They were kept alive for days, their suffering prolonged by physicians, their families forced to watch. One Nubian story tells of an entire village choosing mass suicide rather than surrender their sons. When scouts arrived, they found 800 bodies in the town square, poisoned together. Pepi, furious, ordered their corpses covered in honey and displayed in the palace courtyard. By Pepi's 70s, Egypt itself had begun to collapse. Demographics. Some provinces lost 70% of their male children in a single generation. Burial records show boys of certain ages simply vanished. Economics. Honey farming replaced grain. Famine stalked the Nile Valley. Trade. Neighboring kingdoms shunned Egypt. Sumerians burned Egyptian goods, declaring them cursed. Nubia built fortifications not to stop armies, but to keep Egyptians from stealing children. Even the sea peoples, raiders feared across the Mediterranean, avoided Egyptian waters. Egypt's once mighty army rotted away. Young men refused recruitment, knowing soldier meant child hunter. Garrisons deserted. By Pepi's 85th year, the empire had no military beyond the palace guard, and even they were slipping away in the night. The old kingdom was dying. Not from invasion, not from plague, but from the appetites of one man. By the time Pepi reached his 70s, most men of his era would have long been dead. But Pepi, embalmed in honeyed wine and pampered by the greatest physicians in the Nile Valley, lived on. Age did not weaken his appetites. If anything, it sharpened them. The honey rituals, once his crowning spectacle, no longer satisfied. He needed more victims, more variety, more chambers. The underground complex expanded from 9 rooms to 27, a labyrinth of horror. Multiple sessions ran simultaneously, beetles devouring one boy in the pit, serpents striking another, flames searing a third. The air filled with the cries of dozens at once. One escaped servant described it as a symphony of the damned. The walls were built thick to contain the sound, but at night, Memphis could still hear faint echoes, a chorus of agony drifting through the desert air. And Pepi, now too weak to walk, was carried on a golden litter between chambers. He paused at each, watching for minutes at a time, before being moved on to the next. His wrinkled lips twitched in a smile that had never changed since childhood. But the system that fed his obsessions was crumbling. Scouts returned empty-handed, provinces were drained of suitable boys, villages were abandoned entirely. Resistance, once crushed, now became impossible to suppress because there were simply no children left to take. Even the palace guard, once loyal, deserted in the night rather than raid another village. Procurement became desperate. Soldiers burst into settlements at dawn, seizing every boy between childhood and manhood, killing fathers who resisted, burning homes that tried to hide their children. One papyrus fragment, hidden in a worker's tomb, describes such a raid. They came at sunrise, took every boy who could walk but not yet grow a beard, killed 17 men, bound 43 boys in chains. When they left, the village was silent. Even within the palace, the bureaucracy faltered. Records were destroyed by administrators who could no longer stomach their roles. Physicians fled, servants vanished. The pharaoh demanded more, but his empire was rotting from within. The final atrocity is too horrific for even Egyptian scribes to fully record. Greek historians centuries later refused to provide details. They wrote only that Pepi, in his 96th year, presided over a ritual involving 40 boys, insects bred to impossible size, and substances that should never touch human flesh. It lasted from sunset to dawn. Not one boy survived. And through it all, the ancient pharaoh smiled. 3 days later, he died in his sleep, not by rebellion, not by justice, not by gods. He simply stopped breathing. He was found clutching a piece of honeycomb, his mouth twisted into what servants described as an expression of eternal hunger. The moment Pepi's death was confirmed, chaos erupted in the palace, but not mourning. Servants rushed to destroy evidence. Scrolls burned in bonfires for days. Walls were chiseled clean of inscriptions. The honey chambers were sealed with massive blocks of stone. The surviving boys, still trapped in palace dormitories, were not freed. They were sealed inside with the chambers, left to starve in darkness, their existence too dangerous to acknowledge. His successor, Merenre II, ruled for less than a year. His only significant act was overseeing the erasure of Pepi's crimes. Even Pepi's mummy was sabotaged. Organs were removed incorrectly. Corrosive salts were used. His body was wrapped backward. Insects were placed in his cavity to devour him from within. His pyramid was deliberately constructed with weak limestone, so that within a century it collapsed onto his sarcophagus. The priests had not mummified him for eternity. They had condemned him to rot. Egypt itself collapsed with Pepi. The Old Kingdom, unified for 800 years, shattered within months of his death. Provinces broke away, claiming independence. Irrigation canals, once meticulously maintained, were abandoned. Trade routes shifted permanently. The demographic wound was catastrophic. Entire generations of boys were missing. Bloodlines were erased. Families broken beyond repair. Some regions never recovered their pre-Pepi populations. For centuries, the trauma lived on in whispers, superstitions, and silent traditions. Even today, some Egyptian families refuse to eat honey without knowing why. It is simply passed down. Do not eat honey, do not ask why. What makes Pepi terrifying is not just his cruelty, but the pattern he represents. History has seen echoes of him across cultures. Roman Emperor Tiberius, who retreated to Capri and trained children to serve him in pools. Gilles de Rais, the French noble who fought alongside Joan of Arc before retiring to his castle to torture and kill between 80 and 200 children. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, accused of bathing in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. But Pepi dwarfs them all. He ruled not for decades, but for 94 years. His victims numbered not in the hundreds, but in the tens of thousands. Most crucially, Pepi systematized evil. He turned atrocity into bureaucracy. Procurement became a department, torture became a process. His empire itself was restructured to feed his appetites. This was not sadism alone, this was industrialized suffering. Archaeologists today still find mass graves of children from Pepi's era, small skeletons with identical trauma patterns, statistical shadows of 50,000 lives consumed by one man's hunger. Their names are lost, their stories erased, their bones scattered beneath the sand. But in one sense, they triumphed. Their collective absence collapsed an empire. No army defeated Egypt, no foreign invasion toppled the Old Kingdom. It was destroyed by missing children. Pepi lived to 100, dying peacefully in his bed, believing himself divine. But his victims brought down the most powerful civilization on earth, not with rebellion, but with absence. That is their victory. What turns a boy into a monster? Pepi's story is not simply one of cruelty. It is a textbook case of what happens when power and trauma collide at the wrong age. At 6 years old, Pepi underwent a coronation ritual meant for adults. He was drowned in blood, handed a blade, ordered to kill, and crowned as a god before his mind could even distinguish symbol from reality. Instead of learning empathy, he learned philosophy in the language of death. Instead of boundaries, he learned that his desires were divine law. Modern psychology has a term for this: narcissistic deification. A child who grows up believing he is literally more than human never develops the circuitry of empathy. Other people are not people. They are instruments, toys, data points. Pepi II was not born evil. He was manufactured. Like any addict, Pepi's tolerance grew. What began as curiosity became compulsion. What began with one execution grew into decades of experimentation. At first, he only watched. Then he experimented. Then he orchestrated. Finally, he industrialized. He treated suffering the way a vintner treats wine, categorizing flavors, intensities, pairings. He was not satisfied with pain. He needed to taste every variety of pain. By old age, even that was not enough. He escalated until his empire collapsed beneath him. But here is the most chilling part. Pepi did not act alone. Priests consecrated his rituals as divine. Nobles sent their sons as tribute. Soldiers enforced quotas. Physicians healed boys just enough to be used again. Administrators kept records of every measurement, every scream, every disappearance. Most were not sadists. They were functionaries. People who told themselves it was not their fault, that they were powerless, that refusal meant death. They rationalized, then compromised, then participated, and in doing so, they built the machinery of atrocity. This is the part of Pepi's story that repeats most often in history. Monsters are not made alone. They are enabled by those who look away, by those who follow orders, by those who decide survival is worth more than conscience. We like to think Pepi is a relic, a horror of ancient Egypt, but the pattern he established has echoed through every era. Tiberius, Roman emperor, who kept children in his villa, training them as little fish for his pools. Gilles de Rais, a medieval nobleman who used his castle as a slaughterhouse for hundreds of children. Elizabeth Bathory, who bathed in the blood of girls, convinced it preserved her youth. But none of them ruled for 94 years. None of them commanded the infrastructure of an empire. None of them industrialized suffering the way Pepi did. And yet, the same pattern emerges: absolute power, perverted appetite, no consequences. It would be comforting to think we are immune now. That modern civilization, with laws and media and oversight, prevents such monstrosities. But the pattern remains. It has only changed its clothing. Private jets to private islands, secret chambers hidden behind corporations and foundations, victims disbelieved, evidence destroyed, investigations that end mysteriously. The names are different, but the structure is the same. A powerful figure, a network of enablers, a bureaucracy of silence. Victims chosen precisely because they are vulnerable, unseen, disposable. Pepi II proved that with enough power and time, atrocity can be normalized. His nobles accepted the honey chambers as divine ritual. His priests blessed procurement as sacred duty. His people surrendered children because they believed resistance was impossible. The terrifying truth: modern society has its own honey chambers. They may not drip with insects and honey, but they exist. They operate in shadows, and they leave the same silence in their wake. 50,000 children disappeared into Pepi's chambers. Their names are lost, their graves unmarked, their lives erased. But their absence ended a civilization. No war, no plague, no famine destroyed the old kingdom. It was undone by the disappearance of its children. The absence of future generations created a wound so deep that Egypt never recovered. This is why Pepi's victims matter. They remind us that atrocity is not just cruelty in the moment, it is a theft of the future. Their silence still screams. Visit Saqqara today, and you will see Pepi's pyramid, a crumbling pile of stone, closed to tourists for restoration for 40 years. It will likely never open. Beneath its rubble are chambers no one dares expose. Walk Cairo's markets, and you will find jars of honey. Sweet, golden, innocent. Tourists buy them without knowing that, for some families, honey is still taboo. No one remembers why. They only whisper, "Do not eat it, do not ask why." This is Pepi's legacy, a sweetness that masks horror, a tradition of silence passed across 4,000 years. And perhaps the most terrifying reminder of all, monsters are not born, they are made, and we are the ones who make them. Picture the chamber again, the torches burning low, the boy glistening with honey, the insects crawling, biting, stinging. You want to rush forward to free him, but you can't. You're a soldier, a servant, a priest trapped in a system where resistance means death. So you stand and watch. This is how civilizations collapse, not with invaders storming the gates, not with plagues or famines, but with silence, with ordinary people deciding that survival is worth more than defiance. The boy dies, another replaces him, and the system continues until there are no boys left. Historians often argue about why the Old Kingdom fell. Some blame climate change, the Nile's floods grew unreliable. Others cite economic collapse or political fragmentation. But archaeology reveals a deeper truth. Burial records show entire generations missing. In some provinces, 70% of male children vanish from the record, not dead from disease, not killed in war, simply gone. This demographic wound is unlike anything else in ancient history. It is not famine, it is not plague, it is atrocity. The collapse of Egypt was not natural. It was deliberate, self-inflicted, engineered by a pharaoh who consumed his own people until the foundation crumbled. This is why Pepi II is more than a grotesque anecdote. He is a blueprint. Every time absolute power combines with unchecked appetite, the same pattern emerges. A child monarch in Egypt, a Roman emperor on Capri, a medieval noble in a castle, a countess in the Carpathians, a billionaire with private islands. Different names, different methods, same pattern. Each time, enablers appear. Priests, bureaucrats, guards, lawyers, fixers. Each time, victims are chosen for their voicelessness. Each time, atrocities are hidden in plain sight, justified, normalized, forgotten. We tell ourselves we are better now, but Pepi's silence still echoes, warning us. Civilization is always one monster away from collapse. Silence is Pepi's most enduring legacy. The silence of priests who knew but said nothing. The silence of nobles who surrendered their sons. The silence of scribes who burned records. The silence of archaeologists today, still refusing to open certain sealed chambers. Silence is not absence. Silence is complicity. And silence is what allows monsters to thrive. The 50,000 boys who vanished into Pepi's chambers have no monuments, no names etched in stone, no hymns to carry them into eternity. But they have something far louder. Their absence collapsed the Old Kingdom. Their missing futures ended a civilization. Their bones whisper across 4,000 years that unchecked power devours itself. In that sense, they won. They destroyed the god who consumed them, not in battle, but in silence so vast it swallowed an empire. The honey may be gone, the chambers sealed, the pharaoh dust, but the pattern lives. Today, it hides in mansions and islands, in industries that consume lives for profit, in governments that treat people as expendable, in systems that normalize exploitation until atrocity feels ordinary. The question is not whether another Pepi exists. The question is whether we will notice him before it's too late. Because every empire is vulnerable. Every society has cracks. Every civilization is only 94 years of unchecked power away from collapse. Listen closely. In the silence between your own heartbeats, in the buzzing of a fly at night, in the echo of a chamber long sealed beneath desert sand, if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. 50,000 children screaming in honey-covered agony, not because they want your pity, not because they want remembrance, but because they want you to understand. Monsters are not born. They are made, and we are the ones who make them. The pharaoh is dead, his pyramid is dust, his name still sits in history books. But his victims? They left us something greater than memory. They left us a warning. The question is not whether we can hear it. The question is whether we are listening,